He had strict rules, no omegas, only work, only discipline. I said I was a beta. He said, fine. And he looked at me like he already knew. Or wanted to. The iron gates to Victor Hale's estate slid open so slowly I had time to decide. 3 different ways to run away, and 2 different speeches about self-respect. The motor hummed, the bars parted, and the gravel drive unspooled between dark pines like the spine of something carnivorous. Wolves, no, men, patrolled along the fence line in slate-gray jackets, eyes cutting toward my rusted hatchback, as if it had committed a crime by existing. My palms were damp on the steering wheel. The cheap scent blocker I dabbed at my pulse points tingled and burned like a lie. It was a lie. But I needed the job. Rent did not care who you were, only that you paid on the first. I parked in front of a house that was more fortress than home. Sharp angles, black, stone, glass that reflected sky like a mirror you could fall into and drown. A steel placard stood by the path to the front steps. The rules were etched in clean lines. The Hale Pack's creed: no visitors without permission, no weapons, no alcohol on duty, no omegas on premises. My mouth went dry. Underneath, someone had added a line with a label maker, kitchen entrance, and an arrow that felt like mercy or mockery depending on how hard you were squinting. Kitchen it is, I muttered, shouldering my bag. The strap bit into my collarbone, a neat reminder to keep my posture straight and my head down. The kitchen door was industrial steel with a small circular window. I knocked. It echoed like I'd punched a safe. A beta in a white shirt opened it, one eyebrow jumping when he took in the state of me. The thrift store jacket, the scar on my knuckle where a cheap pan had taught me about heat the hard way. Sage? He asked, checking a clipboard. Yeah. Victor will see you. I didn't expect the alpha himself to interview a cook. But the beta led me past gleaming countertops, and a wall of knives arranged with such precision they felt like a threat, then through a short hall into an office that was almost aggressively simple. A desk, a window, a man. Victor Hale stood with his back to me, a tall frame outlined by winter light. When he turned, the first honest thought that hit me was, he looks tired. Not in the small way, no shadows a nap could fix, but a structural tiredness like a building that had weathered too many storms and counted them in its bones. His face was all hard planes and reluctant beauty, a cut jaw, a straight mouth that didn't remember smiling, dark hair swept back with the kind of control that gets mistaken for ease. His eyes were the trouble, gray and clear, the sort that didn't just look at you, but into you, past you, through you. Sage, he said. And my name came out like a verdict. Victor didn't offer a hand, which was fine. My own were not steady enough to risk it. He scanned the resume I'd printed on the cheapest paper and set it aside. You cooked at the shoreline for 2 years, he said. Statement, not question. 3, I answered. 2, as sous chef. Why did you leave? Chef believed in screaming as a seasoning. I prefer salt. A muscle in his cheek moved, almost a smile, almost a twitch. We don't scream here, he said. We also don't tolerate mistakes that endanger my pack. I don't burn things, I said. Not food anyway. The joke fell out on impulse and landed on the floor between us with a gentle thud. I wanted to kick it under the desk. Victor didn't pick it up. He studied me. And in the stretch of silence, I became excruciatingly aware of everything I was trying not to be. The heat under my skin, the flutter at my throat, the animal part of me that bristled and curled and wanted. I breathed shallowly, thinking of cold water and hard bread, of closed windows, and how to become blank air. What are you? He asked. The question was a knife, clean, precise, familiar. I'm a beta. Fine, he said, the same way one might say rain is inconvenient. He wrote something on the clipboard he'd taken from the other beta. Time, maybe, or my wrongness. Then looked up. Kitchen at 6, breakfast at 8, lunch at 1, dinner at 7. You'll have an assistant for prep. You will not wander. You will not interfere with pack patrols. You will keep the back door locked after dark. Yes, I said. Understood. His gaze flicked to my throat. I swallowed. He looked away. "Do you have anything to add?" he asked. "I bake," I said, because the safest thing in my arsenal was butter and sugar. Pies mostly. People forgive a lot after pie. The corner of his mouth shifted again, a tremor of something that vanished before it learned its own name. "We'll see if that's true." He dismissed me with a nod that managed to be polite and absolute. On my way out, I nearly collided with a man in a gardener's coat, older, with hands like twisted roots and eyes that had learned patience. He tipped his cap, glanced toward Victor's office door, then toward me, like he could smell the conversation still hanging between us. "Watch your steps, son," he said, not unkindly. "Ground's uneven." "Thanks," I said, and I wasn't entirely sure we were talking about the floor. Back in the kitchen, I set my bag on the stainless table and let my lungs on stick. The room smelled like lemon oil and cold steel, with a memory of coffee lingering like a rumor. If I kept my head down, I could do this. Cook, clean, keep my body small, and my scent smaller. I opened the walk-in and surveyed the shelves, eggs stacked in paper cradles, heavy, cream-like possibility, a crate of apples wearing the dull blush of late season. My hands knew what to do when my head didn't. Butter into the freezer. Flour weighed by grams. A whisper of nutmeg if the apples were polite. Cinnamon if they were stubborn. Knife. Board. Peel. Breathe. The first apple snapped under my blade with a crisp sound that made something inside me unknot. Work was a rhythm. Slice, toss, chill, roll. Control where I could get it. There was a comfort in measuring exactly, in trusting heat to be the thing it always was. Stoves didn't lie. People did. Bodies certainly did. A shadow crossed the window of the kitchen door. I didn't look up. The dough needed attention. Also, looking up meant risking gray eyes and questions I couldn't afford. I brushed the pastry with egg, sprinkled sugar that would melt to a glassy sheen, and slid the pie into the oven. Heat rolled out in a soft wave that kissed my face and prickled my forearms. "Smells good," a voice said. I turned. Not Victor, a young beta, maybe 19, with a too-big apron, and a grin that made him look like he was perpetually on the edge of asking for a favor. He lifted a hand in a wave. "I'm Evan. I run food up to the outer post sometimes. Didn't know we were doing dessert." "We aren't," I said. "I am," he laughed. "You'll last a week, maybe 2. "Optimist," I said. "Realist. People don't settle here unless they belong a beat, or unless he wants them to." He meant Victor. Everyone here meant Victor when they said he, like the estate itself had a single pronoun. Evan helped me haul a sack of potatoes up onto the counter, chatting about patrol, schedules, and the way the northern fence sometimes hummed in the cold. I listened with half an ear and both hands busy. When the timer chimed, I pulled the pie. It was perfect in the way that made me ache, blistered gold, lattice seams glossy and delicate, steam breathing from the vents. Evan's eyes went round. "If you ever need a sworn testimony on your behalf, I can be bought with that." "Useful to know," I said. "Plates are in the upper cabinet?" He pointed. I cut a wedge, the crust shattering softly, the filling sighing into the hollow. When I slid the plate across, I realized I'd plated a second piece without meaning to. A habit, one for the guest, one for the man whose approval decided if I kept the lights on. Footsteps in the hall. Not Evan's light bounce. He straightened. Victor filled the doorway, the room tilting a degree toward him as if the house had learned his gravity. He took in the scene, the flour dust on my shirt, the knife in my hand, the pie, and something unreadable loosened across his face. "I don't remember ordering dessert," he said. "You didn't," I answered. "But I believe in hedging bets." Evan vanished like smoke. Victor stepped inside. The temperature in my body did the disobedient thing again, heat rising, a pulse waking under my skin. I breathed through the scent blocker's sting and set the second plate on the counter. "For you," I said. "Quality control." He studied the offered slice for a long heartbeat. Then he took the fork, cut a precise bite, and tasted it. His eyelashes lowered. When he opened his eyes, they were cooler than before, and not because he disliked it, Good, he said. Keep the door locked after dark. Yes, sir. He left as quietly as he'd come. The air moved in around the space he'd occupied like water closing over a stone. I exhaled, then laughed under my breath at myself, jumpy, foolish, grateful for a single word like a starving man for crumbs. This was why I didn't do alphas. This was why I lied. This was why the rules on the placard were not abstract. I washed my hands, scrubbed the board, lined up the knives until their reflections all pointed in the same stern direction. Work, discipline, repeat, the only prayer I trusted. Behind my ribs, something answered anyway, a low, traitorous hum that recognized the shape of a storm, and called it weather. I told it to shut up and peeled another apple. Morning wrapped the kitchen in pale light and lemon oil. By 6, the burners were breathing a steady blue, and the room smelled like coffee, yeast, and the promise of onions that hadn't cried yet. I set 3 pans to heat, one for bacon, one for mushrooms, one empty because control looks better in 3s. And started my day the only way I knew how. Mise en place until anxiety ran out of counter space. My style is simple because simple doesn't lie. If you salt the mushrooms and crowd the pan, they weep and steam instead of browning. If you want the yolks to stand up like they mean it, you bring the eggs to room temp. If you want butter to laminate a pastry properly, you keep it cold. And your temper colder. Food keeps its promises if you give it the right conditions. Bodies. Less so. The walk-in held a little shrine to order, eggs in gray flats, herbs tucked in damp paper like love letters, milk so fresh it still remembered the field. I crushed rosemary between my fingers and let the oils bloom. Breakfast would be rosemary potatoes, soft scramble, mushrooms that knew who they were, toast that crunched like a good boundary. The back door thumped open. A square of chilly air rolled in, carrying damp earth, clipped grass, and the green metal smell of the northern fence. The old gardener from yesterday stepped in, boots leaving polite ghosts on the tile. Up close, his eyebrows were independent nations, and his hands could graft a tree or break you of a bad habit without changing expression. "Mornin'," he said, tipping his cap. "You're the new cook." "Sage," I said. "You're the reason the herbs look smug." He showed his teeth for a heartbeat. "Rowan," he said. "Which fit? Garden's mine. House is his." His chin tilted in the direction of a lot of black stone and one man's gravity. "You need anything from out there, you ask? I'll tell you what's honest, and what's just pretty." "I'll take honest," I said. "Pretty lies to you." "Amen." He set a crate of early greens on the stainless and lifted a bunch of thyme to his nose, eyes going soft at some private memory. "His pair liked this on lamb," Rowan said, off-handed like weather. "Used to come out to the beds and fuss at me for letting it bolt. The pan hissed too sharply. I'd turned the heat up without noticing." "She?" I asked before I could stop myself. Then wished I could take the pronoun back and put it in the compost. Rowan's mouth pressed, not unkindly. "Doesn't take," he said, "pronouns." What mattered wasn't the word. He set the time down like it had a pulse. What mattered was that the house sounded different. I understood that in the way you understand a smell you can't name. Some rooms hold laughter in their paint. Rowan wiped his hands on his coat. "If you walk the garden paths, take the east track first. Less mud. Watch your step." "I'm learning," I said. He gave me a long look. "All of us are." He left by the service door, and with him went the last of the night air. I slid plated breakfasts into warming drawers, and built a tray for the dining room. Toast, standing like soldiers, butter soft but not weeping. Jam that stained the spoon red. The dining room at 7 seemed like a bad room for a beta with an honest face and an inconvenient endocrine system, so I sent the tray with the same quiet beta who'd led me yesterday. He accepted it with professional blankness, which I decided to interpret as affection. By 8 the kitchen had shifted to lunch prep, chicken stock murmuring in a low pot, celery sweating in butter, a mountain of carrots lined like a graph of poor choices. The back door cracked again. Hi." Evan stood there like he'd been considering leaving for 10 full seconds, and then forgot which way was out. His apron was still too big. His grin was too. "You're back," I said, as if he'd left on a cliffhanger. "I came to, check if you need anything carried. Or peeled." He held up a peeler like a peace offering. "Mostly if you need me to not be in the way while I learn how not to be in the way." "Peel," I said, pushing a bowl of apples toward him. "Quarter, core, thin slices. If a slice is thicker than my patience, do it again." He laughed, settled on a stool, and started in. His first few slices were the shape of confusion. Then his hands found a rhythm. "What's the secret to pies?" he asked. "Cold butter, colder panic," I said, "and patience. If you can wait without poking at something, you can make pastry in friendships." Evan nodded gravely, absorbing wisdom and apple juice. "Do you think... could you maybe show me how to do the crust sometime?" "Sure," I said, "when your slices look like they belong to the same family." We worked. He asked 100 small questions, most of them better than they sounded. He told me about the outer posts, and the way the wood sounded different when it was about to snow. I told him about the way sugar turns glassy if you scatter it over hot fruit and give it the kind of look that means business. At 10, I took a break I called inventory, and Rowan called breathing. The east track did, in fact, have less mud. The garden was a geometry of beds and paths. Winter tired but not surrendered. Kale waved small flags. Rosemary pretended to be a hedge. The greenhouse hummed with a faint life like someone sleeping deeply. From the garden, the main house looked like a person who had decided not to fall apart and was holding very still about it. On the second floor, one window was open an inch, just enough to let the air argue its case. A figure crossed behind the glass, paused, then disappeared. I plucked thyme and sage and told myself not to take it personally. By noon, the dining room wanted roasted chicken on pilaf with lemon. The smell of schmaltz and citrus drifted down the hall, which I'm told counts as flirting in certain circles. I plated for 12, checked the shine of the pan sauce, swore at a parsley stem, and sent the trays out in a procession of steady hands. The kitchen exhaled. Evan was elbow-deep in dishwater, still humming the tune of his own survival. "You can take a break," I told him. He flicked suds at me. "You're not my alpha." "Thank God," I said. "I'm no one's..." The doorframe took on a shadow. My spine knew who stood there before my eyes did. Victor didn't step in right away. He watched from the threshold like the kitchen was a perimeter, and I was either an asset or a breach. Lunch smelled competent, he said. "I'll embroider that on a pillow," I said, and Evan choked on a laugh. Victor's gaze flicked to the boy. Evan became very interested in a pan. "Do you need something, sir?" I asked, because silence felt like a dare. Victor entered then, and the room redistributed itself to make sense of it. He took in the cooling racks, the pie crusts resting under tea towels, the stack of prepped greens, the way I kept my knives as straight as a creed. His attention is its own weather, pressure change, a front moving through. The back door was cracked for the heat. A breeze slipped in, threaded through steam and rosemary, and reached my throat like a curious hand. I had a split second to think of cold rivers and sealed windows and blank air. It didn't matter. It was small, a thread, not a flag, but scent doesn't need volume to be true. Victor's shoulders tightened by a degree most people would miss. His pupils flexed. The air seemed suddenly very interested in us. I didn't move. Neither did he. Evan froze, understanding nothing and everything. The breeze died like it had been caught doing something improper. Victor's jaw worked once, a precise correction. He reached past me, deliberately not close, to nudge the back door shut with 2 fingers. The latch clicked. The room held its breath, then exhaled. "Keep it closed," he said, voice even, eyes cooler than the fridge. "Yes, sir." A beat. His gaze traveled from my face to the bowl of apples to my hands, which were steady because I told them to be. "The boy learning crust," he said. "Good. Someone has to carry on the religion," I said. "I'll write him a catechism. Step 1. Don't touch the dough too much." The corner of his mouth did that almost thing. "You'll prep dinner at 5. We eat at 7. "Yes." He turned to go, paused, then, like it cost him nothing and everything, said, "The rosemary, good choice." I saluted with a sprig. "I aim to please." He left. The latch made the smallest sound when the kitchen was ours again. Evan whispered, "What just happened?" "Cross breeze," I said. "Science." He peered at me like the answer was printed on my skin. "Right. Science." We went back to work because that is what saves you until it doesn't. I rolled dough with the restraint of a saint and the caution of a liar. Outside, somewhere beyond the glass and the rules, the fence hummed a low, constant note. Inside, my body answered with one of its own. A scent that shouldn't be had introduced itself, politely, like a stranger at the door. Victor had heard it. He had also very clearly chosen not to answer. For now. By Wednesday morning, the kitchen had become a country I ruled by whisk and cleaver. The air always smelled of something becoming itself. Bread going from dough to crust, garlic surrendering to butter, onions softening their attitude in a pan. I'd learned which drawers squeaked, which burners lied about heat, and which shelves in the walk-in liked to shove the milk forward just enough to hit you in the knee if you weren't looking. At 8 sharp, Victor appeared in the doorway like the thought of him had summoned itself. He didn't bother with greetings. "You're hiding something." I kept my back to him, flipping the mushrooms so they browned instead of steamed. "Yes," I said. "My genius pie recipe, generations of secrecy. If the formula ever leaks, civilizations will fall." Silence. I could feel it on the back of my neck like sunburn. When I turned, his arms were folded, expression carved from whatever quarried material they used for cathedrals and bad ideas. "I mean it," he said. "So do I said. "My grandmother would haunt me if I revealed the ratio of cinnamon to nutmeg." A muscle in his jaw moved, but it wasn't anger exactly. He studied me the way a chess player studies a board that might bite. "Anything else?" I asked, flipping the eggs onto a platter with the dignity of a man not under investigation. He glanced at the platter, then at me, then, reluctantly, at the door, as though the kitchen itself might be listening. "Breakfast at 8, he said finally. "Lunch at 1. Dinner at 7. "Sir, yes sir," I said, saluting with the spatula. He left without further commentary, and the room let out the breath it had been holding on my behalf. By noon the kitchen smelled like soup ambition, chicken stock, carrots, thyme, and a thread of pepper. I was checking the salt when my phone buzzed in the pocket of my apron. I slipped into the tiny room off the pantry where staff made private calls, though privacy here was mostly a rumor. "Tell me you're not doing anything stupid," Claire said before hello. Her voice could cut sheet metal. Alpha lungs. My friend since culinary school, where she'd terrified professors and sous chefs equally. "Define stupid," I said. "You took a job in his house." "Technically his kitchen," I said. "Big difference." "Less fur, sage." She said the way some people say don't poke the bear when the bear is already looking at you. Victor Hale doesn't hire omegas. Period. Rumor says he doesn't even like them on the property. "Good news," I said. "I'm a beta." The silence on the line was pointed. "You think he won't find out?" I rubbed the bridge of my nose. "I needed the job." "He lost his pair," she said. Softer now. "You know what that does to an alpha?" "Yes," I said. "It makes them open restaurants in their homes so they can brood over soup." "This isn't funny," Claire snapped. "He finds out, you're gone. If you're lucky." I looked at my reflection in the narrow window, apron dusted with flour, hair shoved back with a bandana like I was auditioning for underpaid Pirate in 3. "I'll keep my head down," I said. "You never keep your head down." "That's slander," I said. "That's biography," she shot back. I promised to call later, and hung up before she could yell again. When I returned, Evan was at my counter like he paid rent there. A bag of sugar sat in front of him like a bribe. "Absolutely not," I said. "You didn't even hear me out. You want to make dessert." "I want you to teach me to make dessert," he corrected, eyes big as the mixing bowls. "Pies, cakes. Maybe those little tarts with the fancy fruit on top? You know we have actual meals to feed actual people," I said. "But dessert makes people happy." He leaned on the counter, earnest as a puppy. "You could pass on the legacy." "Legacy," I repeated. He nodded so hard his hair flopped. You're like the Pie Whisperer. Tragic title, I said. Fine, one recipe. But if you burn the crust, you're out of the will. He grinned, like I'd handed him the moon. At 5, the kitchen smelled like onions surrendering to white wine. The sauce for the evening's chicken reduced to a shine that would've impressed my old chef, a man who measured self-worth in gloss levels. Victor arrived just as I was tasting for salt. He didn't announce himself. The air just shifted and there he was, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe. Evan froze mid-whisk like we were under attack. Victor's gaze moved over the counters, the stove, the rows of plates waiting for food. Then it landed on me. I offered him the tasting spoon. For science, I said. He stepped forward, took the spoon, and tasted the sauce with slow precision. His expression didn't change, but something about the air did. Needs more time? I guessed. His eyes flicked to mine. No, he said. It's right. I nodded, busying myself with the chicken because my pulse was behaving like it wanted attention. Victor set the spoon down carefully, as though it might break if he let it go too fast. He glanced at Evan, then at the tray of pastry shells resting for dessert. The boy learning? He asked. Trying, I said. We're aiming for edible before pretty. Evan straightened, flour on his nose like guilt. Victor's gaze lingered a moment too long, not on Evan, on me, like he was reading ingredients off my skin. Then he nodded once, curt, but not cold. Dinner at 7, he said, and left. The door swung shut behind him. Evan whispered, He's scary. He's busy, I said, reaching for the time. But my hands weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. The house at night was a different animal. During the day, it hummed with kitchen noise, the low murmur of patrol radios, Rowan's, boots in the garden, Evan rattling pots like a musical instrument he hadn't mastered. At night, though, it went silent in a way that felt intentional, like even the walls were holding their breath. I'd run out of cloves, ridiculous thing to fetch at 11 p.m., but my brain refused to settle if I knew the jar was empty. Spices meant control, and control meant sleep. Maybe. The corridor to the pantry was long, lined with windows that reflected more darkness than they let in. My footsteps sounded too loud. I carried a flashlight, its beam cutting narrow slices of hallway like the house could be dissected if you were steady enough. Halfway there, someone turned the corner. Victor. Of course it was. He moved like someone who never worried about being overheard, silent, but not sneaky, the kind of quiet that says mine instead of sorry. A dark sweater instead of his usual button-down, sleeves shoved to the elbows. His hair was mussed like even perfection gave up after 10 p.m. We both stopped. The flashlight landed on his chest. I tilted it down so he wasn't interrogated by battery-powered sun. Out late, he said, voice even. Cloves, I said. Like that explained anything. He arched one brow. Emergency pie? Don't mock the process, I said. The process feeds you. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, more like the ghost of one clearing its throat. Then, because the universe writes its own scripts, the back door at the end of the hall was cracked for air. A breeze slipped through, tugging at the hem of my shirt before I could think to move. It carried my scent with it. I knew the moment it hit him. Victor inhaled once, sharp and involuntary, like the air had gone different. His shoulders went tight. His pupils darkened fast, a storm crossing water. The alpha part of him, the thing under all that discipline and black stone, woke up like someone had kicked the door in. I froze. He closed his eyes for half a second, the kind of blink that looks like pain if you know what to see. When they opened, the gray was thinner around the edges. Close the door, he said. Not loud. Rough. I obeyed because oxygen suddenly felt like gasoline. The latch clicked. Victor turned away first, like the hallway needed his spine instead of his face. His hands curled once, twice, then flattened against his thighs as if he could press the reaction out through muscle and willpower alone. I didn't breathe right. My pulse had ideas about escape velocity. Good night, Sage, he said finally, voice steady like maybe if he spoke carefully enough the air would believe him. Night, I managed. He left down the opposite hall, gait precise, shoulders still set too sharp. I leaned against the wall until my ribs stopped trying to jailbreak themselves. The cloves sat forgotten on the pantry shelf while I stared at the closed door long enough for the flashlight to die in my hand. Rowan found him first. I saw from the kitchen window later, when sleep kept losing the argument. Victor out by the edge of the garden, like the night needed patrolling. He stood with his arms folded, head tipped back as though the stars might brief him on the situation. Rowan approached slow, coat collar up against the wind. The man moved like winter itself had hired him to consult. "You look like hell," Rowan said by way of greeting. Victor didn't glance over. "I've looked worse." Rowan studied him for a moment, then the house behind them, the windows mostly dark except for the faint square of mine upstairs where insomnia was doing laps. "You're breathing different," Rowan said finally. Victor's jaw tightened. "Am I?" "Yeah," Rowan said, calm as weather. "Didn't used to be." Victor didn't answer. The wind moved through the rosemary beds, low and steady. Rowan leaned on the fence. "You remember when she used to drag you out here for the first tomatoes? Wouldn't shut up about the taste of summer?" Victor's shoulders shifted. Not quite a flinch. "Back then," Rowan said, voice gentler now, "you looked alive, son. Like something mattered besides the house standing straight." Victor exhaled through his nose. "Sharp. And now?" "Now," Rowan said, eyes narrowing like he could see things that didn't cast shadows. "You look like you're trying not to." Victor turned then, finally, gaze cutting toward the upstairs window, where my light burned small and stupid against the dark. Rowan followed it, eyebrows rising just enough to be impolite. "Ah," he said softly. "So that's the weather pattern." Victor didn't confirm or deny, which was its own kind of confession. Rowan straightened. "You're a man who likes control," he said. "Ain't my business until it starts eating you alive." "It won't," Victor said, too fast. Rowan eyed the fists at Victor's sides, the pulse in his jaw. He said, which covered more ground than words would have. Then he tipped his cap, already turning toward the greenhouse. "You look alive again. That's all I'm saying." Victor stayed where he was long after Rowan left, the garden around him holding its breath like the house did at night, waiting for something to break first. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of my narrow bed with the jar of cloves untouched on the nightstand. The air in my room felt thick, like the breeze had followed me and hadn't decided whose side it was on. I kept seeing the moment in the hallway when Victor's control had slipped sideways, just enough to show the teeth underneath. He'd shut it down fast, but I'd felt it. Like heat through glass, like the crackle before a storm breaks. And maybe the worst part, the part I didn't want to name, was this: some small, traitorous piece of me hadn't wanted him to shut it down at all. I turned off the light before the night could figure that out for itself. Insomnia herded me to the kitchen like it owned stock in my bad decisions. By midnight, the house had settled into that deliberate quiet again, the kind that made you feel noisy for thinking. I flipped on the hood light, soft amber, conspiratorial, and set a pot on low to warm milk with cardamom and a strip of lemon peel. Spices meant control. Control meant maybe sleep. Outside, the wind brushed the eaves. The back veranda waited beyond the glass, a rectangle of black and silver. On the counter, my hands worked without consulting my head. Honey in the mug, a pinch of nutmeg, a star anise for drama. I breathed in steam and told my pulse to sit. "Couldn't sleep either," Victor said from the doorway. The spoon chimed against ceramic. I didn't jump exactly, but my shoulders remembered how. He wore the same dark sweater from the hallway encounter, sleeves to the elbow, the lines of his forearms stark in that soft light. His hair had lost the discipline it kept in daylight. It made him look younger and more dangerous in equal measure. "Kitchen hours are technically closed," I said, "because habit is a life raft." "I'll file a complaint with management," he said, tone dry. I poured a second mug because pretending I'd been planning for one felt easier than admitting I'd decided the moment he spoke. "Cardamom milk," I said. Trick from a pastry chef who swore it stopped thoughts from chewing through your brain. He accepted the mug, fingers almost brushing mine, then didn't. The steam fogged his breath. "Does it work?" Sometimes, I lifted mine. To us, the sleepless, his mouth admitted the shadow of a smile. He took a cautious sip, then another that was less cautious. The lines at the corners of his eyes eased by a fraction. We stood there with the hood light humming and the rest of the kitchen pretending not to exist. The quiet felt less like a judgment, and more like a held breath. He set the mug down. About earlier, he said. The hallway. The breeze. The look that had edged toward teeth, before he pulled it back to something polite. You don't have to apologize, I said. I'm not apologizing, he answered, not unkindly. I'm acknowledging. He considered the words. I can manage myself. I know, I said. It's me I'm worried about. Something flickered in his expression. Understanding maybe, or its older sibling. Walk, he said, tilting his head toward the veranda like fresh air might dilute the truth. We stepped outside. Cold folded around us, clean and precise. The garden was a geometry of dark shapes and pale paths, the greenhouse a dimly glowing lung. Somewhere in the beds, Rosemary scraped its small, aromatic hands together. We leaned on the rail in companionable silence, our breath ghosting the same air. The house loomed behind us like it was listening for evidence of treason. My pair is gone, he said finally, not looking at me. Years now. I wrote rules because grief needs structure or it eats. They worked mostly. Until the wind decided it had opinions. I wrapped my fingers around the warm mug. How did you lose them? He considered the path that question offered, and chose a smaller one beside it. There isn't an answer that makes it better, he said. Not an accident you can blame, or a villain you can punish. Bodies stop. Bonds don't know what to do with that. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. He nodded once. The movement brittle and honest. You asked Rowan if it was she, he added, almost wry. Pronouns don't take. What mattered was the house sounded different. I heard him say that, I admitted. He also said you look alive again. That's an assessment, Victor said. He let out a breath that misted and shredded. Life isn't exactly what I'd call it. What would you call it? A problem set, he said. With moving variables. My favorite, I said, and he huffed, which was not laughter but was at least adjacent. Silence again. The kind that invited a confession, even when you were trying to keep your secrets under the sink with the bleach. I'm afraid of alphas, I said, like I was reading it off a recipe card. The mug gave my hands something to do while the rest of me fell. Not in a fairy tale way. In the way of control and hierarchies in the stories they tell about what omegas are for. He didn't move. I'm not asking, he said. The words landed like a blanket, not a command. Warmth at the edges. I risked looking at him then. The hood light from the kitchen bled through the glass and caught his features in long, gentle planes. For a heartbeat I thought, I could spend a year learning this face and still find rooms I hadn't opened. Good, I said, because I'm not offering. He turned his head, and in the dull shine of the window I saw us both. Two shapes, a careful space between them. His hand rested on the rail, big and still. I set my mug down, and, before I could think my way out of it, I covered his hand with mine. The warmth surprised me. I don't know why. He lived. Warmth was evidence. He didn't pull away. We stood like that, the smallest bridge built out of bone and nerve. His thumb moved once, not a stroke, more a confirmation that I existed. Okay? He asked. Yes. My voice came out thinner than intended. You. He nodded. The line of his throat worked. Yes. We didn't rush. The night didn't either. Eventually the cold found its way past sweaters and decisions. Inside, I said, and he followed me back through the kitchen's amber, past the counters that smelled like nutmeg and restraint, down the short hall to the staff rooms where doors were narrow and beds narrower. At my threshold, he stopped. May I? He asked. Yes. I shut the door because I needed the symbol more than the privacy. The room was small enough that it had to choose between bed and dignity, and had forfeited the latter. The lamp by the pillow wore a yellow shade that made skin look more forgiving than it is. He stayed by the door, like gravity didn't trust him near the bed yet. I went to him, a slow approach, palms visible as if we were negotiating a truce. "May I touch you?" I asked. "Yes." I put my hand on his forearm first, the safest territory. His skin was warm under the knit. He closed his eyes briefly and opened them again, like he'd remembered where we were. "Okay?" I asked. "Yes." I stepped closer. "Here?" My fingers hovered at his shoulder. "Yes." The sweater was soft and not the point. The point was the way he tipped forward a centimeter, an offering calibrated in millimeters. I rose on my toes and touched my mouth to his cheek. The gentlest press, a punctuation mark rather than a sentence. "Here?" I asked again, this time near his mouth. He swallowed. "Yes." We kissed like people who understood fire regulations. Slow. Contained. Present. No rush to the center of the house. No doors kicked in. When he lifted a hand, he didn't cage my face. He traced the line of my jaw with the backs of his knuckles, a touch that asked and kept asking. "Tell me if you want to stop," he said against my lower lip. "I will," I said. We made a project of it, the way careful people do. Mouth, breath, the measured slide of fabric. Shoes went first, then his sweater, then my jacket. We didn't name the rest. We didn't have to. We stayed mostly dressed because the point wasn't victory, it was proof of life. The bed took us like it had been waiting, springs protesting just enough to reassure me I hadn't dissolved. "Okay?" he asked again, a habit. A promise. "Yes," I said, and guided his hand to the side of my rib cage, where touch felt like explanation. "Here." "Here," he repeated, like a vow. We learned a map without writing it down, the place under my ear that said stay, the place at his wrist that softened. When I kissed it, the length of breath that meant enough, and the length after that which meant still okay. When wanting surged, a tide with opinions, one of us named it and the other anchored it. The world outside narrowed to 3 points, his mouth, my hands, the part of the night that agreed to keep quiet. At one point, when my heartbeat was trying to audition for a different life, I pulled back and said, I'm not ready to." "I know," he said. He pressed his forehead to mine. "I'm not asking." The words landed again, soft and exact. Something inside me loosened that hadn't relaxed in years. I laughed once, a small, incredulous sound. Because who laughs in the middle of all that? "What?" he murmured, amused. "I usually burn the first pancake," I said. "We're not cooking," he said, smiling for real now, brief and bright. "But I'll take the warning under advisement." We breathed. We kissed. We stopped before either of us had to explain anything to morning. He lay on his side with one arm under my neck and the other barely draped over my waist, as if weight might misinterpret itself as claim. The lamp hummed and made both our skins look kinder than we deserved. "You should sleep," he said eventually. Voice low enough to be a blanket. "Bossy," I said, though warmth was already moving through me like a tide deciding to be generous. "Accurate," he returned. "Stay," I said before I could swallow it. He did. Not because he had to. Because he chose. His breathing found a rhythm that my body wanted to match. Somewhere beyond the wall, the fence hummed its constant note, and for the first time since I arrived, the house sounded less like it was holding its breath, and more like it was listening to ours. When sleep came, it didn't sneak. It arrived like agreement. And just before I went under I thought, this is how you survive wanting. One permission at a time, one warm hand, one careful yes. By noon the house had that brittle quiet it wears right before a storm. Even the hood fan seemed to whisper instead of hum. Rowan appeared in the kitchen doorway with his cap in his hands, like it had suddenly gotten too heavy to wear. "Main hall," he said. "Now." I wiped my palms on a towel that did nothing and followed him through the corridor, where my first day's rules were etched in steel. My eyes landed, as if on their own, on the fourth line, "No omegas on premises." The words looked pleased with themselves. The main hall was black stone and echo. Wolves, men with the posture of weather fronts, stood in loose arcs. Sentinels, patrols, kitchen betas, pulled from their stations with knives forgotten in sinks. Evan hovered near the back, eyes too wide, as if anyone could mistake him for invisible if he believed hard enough. The air carried the trace of my morning mistakes. Open windows, careless drafts. Scent makes confessions even when you don't. Victor stood at the far end of the room like he'd been built there. He had that stillness leaders learn, the kind that makes other people decide their own volume. His gaze moved across his pack, then found me and held. No relief there, no surprise, just the certainty of a problem being counted. "Who called this?" Victor asked, voice even. A man with a salt and iron beard stepped forward. One of the enforcers. I'd seen him at the north gate, hands on the steel like he could keep winter out by threatening it. "Sir," he said, "with the respect you give gravity, there's an omega on the property." The words skittered across the stone like something with too many legs. Murmurs. Someone's jaw clicked. Someone else's scent spiked and got smothered by a bracing inhale. Victor didn't look at me. "And?" The enforcer blinked like he'd prepared for a different line. "The placard's clear." "The placard quotes me," Victor said. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. "You brought me a rule. Bring me a reason." "A reason," the man repeated, as if translating arithmetic into theology. "Sir, risk, instability, old wounds." He gestured, and only then did he let his eyes flick toward me. "You told us no omegas. We believed you." Evan stepped forward because his survival instinct sometimes forgets it's employed. "He feeds us," he blurted. Then, realizing the pronoun had made a choice, he swallowed. "I mean, he works here. He hasn't. Nothing bad has." "Evan," Victor said, without looking away from the enforcer. "Back." The boy retreated like tide obeying moon. Rowan took 2 steps to stand at my right. It wasn't a move so much as a decision. The room recalibrated around it. Another voice from the side. A woman with patrol scars and a calm I wanted. "To borrow, sir. If the rule has changed, we should hear it from you. Not from the wind." That landed. You could feel the pack lean over it, listening for what kind of bridge they were being asked to cross. Victor's gaze finally came to me. It did that measuring thing, counting bone and breath, and all the ways a body can become a vote. He didn't look away when he said, "To the room, the kitchen hired a cook. He's under my protection while he works in my house." Protection isn't the same as permission. Everyone in the room knew it. The enforcer's mouth set. "With respect, sir, that skirts the rule's purpose." "And what is its purpose?" Victor asked. "Safety," the woman answered before the enforcer could get righteous about it. "We made this house a place without certain triggers. It helped." She didn't apologize for the word. "We can't pretend scent doesn't have teeth." Across the room, someone exhaled too loud, like their lungs wanted to be counted. The sound whipped the quiet thinner. Victor took a step forward. The hall held its breath for him. "When I wrote that line, it was to keep my grief from telling me what to do," he said. "Not to outsource thinking." "Sir," the enforcer began. "Not quite a challenge. More a warning with manners. If we bend rules for one, we break them for all." Victor's head tilted, and the gray in his eyes did that thin ice thing I'd seen twice now. "We are not bending rules. We are remembering why we made them. And I am telling you, no one touches my cook." The last 3 words went into the stone like stakes. A shift rippled through the pack, the way a crowd reorganizes when it realizes the ground isn't going to move for it. The enforcer's throat worked. "Then say it plain," he said. "Tell us the rule's gone." "It is not gone," Victor said. "It is mine." He let that sit until even the echo settled. Then he turned fully to me in front of everyone, and the room shrank to a line between us that felt like a tightrope. He didn't come close. He didn't make it easier. "Victor Hale is not an easy man. You came on your own," he said. "Will you stay?" The question did something to my ribs that wasn't strictly medical. Every instinct I owned flickered like an animal at a fence line, run or leap. Behind me, Rowan didn't touch me, but I could feel the steadiness of his presence like a hand held out face up. I swallowed. Yes. The word wasn't brave. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple. It changed the room anyway. Someone cursed softly. Someone else said, "Sir," with warning layered in worry. The enforcer stepped, not toward me, but like he wanted to put his body between a rule and its revision. The air thinned to a knife. "Stand down," Victor said. Not a shout. A command without volume. You could feel it move through every spine in the hall like a key turned in a lock. The enforcer stopped mid-weight shift, muscles catching and releasing. He lowered his eyes a fraction, not submission, but acknowledgement of who gets to write the next sentence. "Questions," Victor said, because his cruelty is always fairness first. Not speeches. A hand went up near the back. Young. Too young to hide panic under words. "Sir, what happens if there's a reaction again?" His gaze darted toward the windows, where the estate's wind had a habit of forming opinions. "We close the doors," Victor said. "We remember our training. We act like adults." A dry cough from Rowan. "And we stop opening every damn window," he said. Laughter skittered through the hall, short-lived but real. The tension dipped a degree, replaced with a more sustainable kind. The woman with the patrol scars lifted her chin. "If anyone has a problem with the Alpha's order," she said levelly, "they take it to him. Not to the cook." "That is correct," Victor said. His gaze swept the room again, count complete. "If anyone touches him without permission, they will be disciplined. By me." Discipline is a word that can wear a lot of faces. No one asked which one he meant. My heart had been trying to be a drummer. It set down its sticks and acted like a muscle again. I could feel the weight of what I'd said settle around my shoulders, a coat I'd decided to keep wearing. Stay. The simplest verbs sometimes do the most damage. Victor shifted his attention back to the enforcer. "Marcus, sir. You'll escort Sage back to the kitchen." A dozen arguments flickered across Marcus's eyes and went out one by one. "Yes, sir." "Rowan," Victor said without looking, "you'll walk with them." "Wouldn't miss it for spring," Rowan said. Victor faced the room. "Dismissed." It didn't happen all at once. Packs never do anything all at once. The arcs softened into strands. The men and women reassembled into parts of a machine that knew its job. Murmurs rose and fell like a tide finding its level. The placard's words at the corridor would still be there when we left, but they no longer sounded like a law, they sounded like a sentence waiting to be edited. Marcus approached me slower than pride wanted him to. He smelled like iron filings and restraint. "Sir," he said to Victor without taking eyes off me, "I'll return to the North Post after." Victor nodded. "See that you do." We walked. Rowan's boots kept time. Marcus kept distance like it meant something. The hall behind us exhaled, and the house began being a house again. Footsteps, radio static, the low talk of a place deciding how to go on. At the kitchen threshold, Marcus paused. His voice stayed low enough to be mistaken for the fan. "Rules keep us," he said, "not precisely to me. Sometimes they keep us from ourselves. Sometimes they keep us from living," Rowan said, too mildly to be toothless. Marcus grunted, which in some languages is concession. He left by the service door, already reassembling into duty. Rowan looked at me. "Breathe," he said, like it was a skill I hadn't practiced. They did. The first inhale felt like theft. The second felt like a loan. The third felt like mine. Evan slid from behind the pantry like he'd been holding up the wall. "That was," he began, and ran out of adjectives. "You okay?" I considered the question. "Ask me after dinner," I said. "If the roast doesn't seize, I might be." He nodded solemnly, then brightened with a reckless, blessed youth. "Can we still do tarts?" "Evan," I said, because the only answer to panic is pastry. "Preheat the oven." Behind the swing door, down the corridor, I could almost feel Victor still holding the hall with the set of his shoulders. He had asked in front of everyone, I had answered in front of everyone. The wind would keep having opinions. The placard would keep pretending to be permanent. But there, in the kitchen that had become my country, the ovens came to life when asked. The sugar turned glassy under heat, the dough yielded to patient hands. And for now, for exactly right now, that was enough. By late afternoon the kitchen had the hum of a festival. Ovens blinked their orange eyes, and the counters wore a dusting of flour that looked like it had snowed exclusively on my domain. Evan sifted sugar with the solemnity of a priest, Rowan set a basket of rosemary on the stainless like an offering. Ceremonies require greenery, Rowan said. And something that smells like yes. Rosemary says remember, I said. Then it'll do, he answered, and tapped 2 sprigs against my wrist as if anointing. We were doing pies because of course we were. 2 latticed apple, 1 lemon meringue that looked like the sky learning to be kind, and a savory tart with caramelized onions and goat cheese, because happiness has layers. Evan had earned the right to crimp edges without my supervision. He treated the crust like it might tell secrets if handled gently enough. Is this too rustic? He asked, peering at his crimps. Rustic is code for made by a person, I said. We are very pro-person today. He grinned, then sobered. Do you think they'll... He stopped before the words accept or behave could get out and ruin the batter. They'll be fed, I said. People behave better when their mouths are busy. That's science, Evan said, pleased to know the field of his favorite subject was expanding. The clock above the pantry door clicked its way toward evening. Out the window, the garden had been tidied into ceremony, long tables draped in white. A path cleared between thyme and kale, the greenhouse shining like a second moon. The pack's murmurs drifted in like the tide testing the shore. Claire arrived at the service entrance 30 minutes early, and exactly on purpose. She wore a dark suit that could cut you or hire you. Her hair was back, her smile forward, and her scent sensible and clean, the way a person smells when they've taken your "don't get me killed" text personally. You're allowed in? I asked. She lifted a laminated pass with Victor's signature on it. Yes, she said. On parole. Her eyes scanned my face, then my hands, the way cooks check for burns. You okay? Today? I considered it honestly. Yes. She looked past me to the pies cooling on the rack. So this is what rewriting history smells like. She leaned in, read the faint stencil Rowan had dusted over one of the crusts in powdered sugar, a sprig of thyme. Clever, subtle propaganda, I said. We seduce them with butter, and reform them with herbs. Claire's mouth curved. Text me the recipe for overthrowing patriarchal rule with pastry, she said. For my files. Victor appeared in the doorway the way he always did, without warning, like the house had drawn him there by aligning its load-bearing walls. He'd traded black for gray crisp shirt, open collar. Something in his profile looked lighter, like weight redistributed rather than lifted. Ready? He asked me, as if he'd asked the pies the same. Only on equal terms, I said, because I could not stop myself. Only, he agreed, without missing a beat. Claire cut her gaze between us, satisfied as a mechanic hearing a well-tuned engine. I'll sit near the back, she said. If anyone lunges, I'll trip them with excellent form. Appreciated, Victor said, distracted enough to be genuine. We carried the pies out together, me, Evan, 2 kitchen betas I'd bribed with spoonfuls of lemon curd, Rowan with the rosemary, and a new placard under his arm. The old rules were still in the corridor, metal letters sure of themselves, no omegas on premises. We didn't stop, we didn't salute. The garden gathered us in. The pack shifted into arcs, then softened into a half-circle when Victor stepped onto the cleared path. Rowan set the placard against the base of a rosemary bush, face down for now. Claire ghosted to a respectful distance, hands in pockets, eyes bright. Victor didn't make a speech, not at first. He stood with his palms open, a deliberate choice for a man who knows what fists look like, and let the wind move around him. When he did speak, he aimed the words at the space between people, the way a bridge aims at both banks. When I hung rules on the wall, he said, it was to keep grief from running the house. A ripple through the crowd, recognition and old ache. He didn't let it rise. Those rules served us. They also became a way to avoid decisions. Today is a decision. He turned to me then, and the half-circle redrew itself so the line between us was the only geometry that mattered. He didn't come closer, he didn't need to. Sage came here on his own, he said. He said yes, on his own. I ask now in front of you, his voice didn't wobble, mine might have, in some other world, will you be my pair? It wasn't the room I felt, not really. It was the house, the greenhouse, the rosemary, the windows that had learned our breath, even the hum of the far fence like a low note waiting for harmony. The question hung in that air like a promise with a blank line. Yes, I said. It sounded steady because it was true. Sound carries differently outdoors. The pack took it in together. You could hear hearts if you were unkind. I wasn't. Marcus, the enforcer who believed in steel, brought his fist to his chest. Not quite a salute. More like a heartbeat he was willing to share. The woman with the patrol scars nodded once, clean and professional, and the nod went through the crowd like a cue. Then hear me, Victor said, and the alpha in his voice was not loud and did not need to be. Sage is my pair. He is under my protection. He is under my respect. And you, he lifted his chin, not a threat, a contract. Will treat him with yours, a low chorus of assent. Not unanimous because that is not how real assent sounds, but enough to bind. A few voices rougher, a few late. That's fine. The future rarely starts on time. Rowan stepped forward with the rosemary, and a small bowl of sea salt. Old ways for new people, he said, and pinched salt into our palms. We tasted the same grit, the same clean. He touched rosemary to our wrists, an oil-bright mark that smelled like kitchens and gardens, and memory that didn't hurt. Witnessed, Rowan said, which isn't legal language but feels older. We did not kiss because this wasn't that kind of moment. We stood side by side while the pack learned the new shape of the house by looking at us. And then, because politics must give way to logistics, we fed them. Evan presented the first pie like a holy object. Don't drop it, I whispered. I won't drop our future, he whispered back. And then went red because apparently he'd said that out loud. Strong motto, Claire murmured, sliding in next to me to accept a slice with battlefield grace. She took a bite, closed her eyes like a critic weaponizing joy, and announced, Congratulations! Also, I've decided you're changing the front placard. We are, Victor said, appearing with an economy of motion that should be studied. He lifted the new sign Rowan had brought and turned it so the pack could read. Respect this house. Respect each other. Close the door after dark. Pies on Fridays. Laughter broke warm and human. Claire tapped the metal with her knuckle. Now you've got a cookbook where the blacklist used to be. Progress, I said. Better branding, she corrected. We ate in the garden under strings of soft bulbs someone had hung while I wasn't looking. The lemon meringue vanished in minutes, which I took as a sign from the gods of sugar that we were, if not forgiven, then indulged. Marcus accepted a slice like it was an oath he intended to keep. The woman with the scars asked Evan about his crimps and actually smiled at his answer. People relaxed the way they do when their bodies learn the new rules faster than their minds. Later, when the plates were empty and the tables were a mess that promised a story to the morning, Victor and I slipped to the veranda with the small exhaustion of good events heavy in our bones. The house behind us exhaled. The garden flickered with late laughter. Somewhere, the fence hummed its neutral note. We leaned on the rail, exactly where we'd stood the night I said I was afraid. Rosemary and sugar lingered on my skin. A perfume I would have invented if it didn't already exist. You did well, he said. You did better, I answered. He considered the lawn like it had ideas. I thought declaring it would feel like breaking something. And it felt like building, he said. After a beat, with you, my chest did the unhelpful thing again. I turned my wrist so our rosemary marks lined up. Green oil catching the porch light. Rowan said the house sounds different when people live in it on purpose. It does, Victor said. It did. We were quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. In my peripheral vision, I could see Claire in the doorway, saluting, with 2 fingers in the old rude way that means call me if he stops. Deserving you. Evan down in the grass trying to pocket the last wedge of onion tart like a raccoon. With manners, Rowan hanging the new placard beside the old bolts with the patience of weather. You ask me in front of them, I said. That mattered. You answered in front of them, he said. That mattered more. I bumped his shoulder with mine. So, I said. Fridays? Fridays, he confirmed. Pies? Pies, he said, and then, softer, and other ordinary miracles. We stood there while the bulbs winked off one by one, and the house remembered how to be dark without being grim. The future didn't arrive with trumpets. It came the way dough rises, slow and certain if you give it warmth and time. We had both. When the wind did what it always does, came nosing around the corner, curious about our decisions, Victor reached past me and, with ridiculous gentleness, closed the veranda door. Not a rule. A choice. For the future, he said. For the future, I echoed. And the house, polite for once, held our words the way a good oven holds heat, evenly, thoroughly, ready for what comes next.